Chapter 16 to 17. Takigakure no Sato. Shibuki, the current leader of Takigakure no Sato, was sitting in his office with a grim look on his face. Despite the somewhat quiet period in the past 2 years, he was still worried about his home coming under an invasion by their neighboring village, Iwagakure no Sato. Kuma no Kuni, Tori no Kuni and Kusagakure had already been merged into the territory of Tsuchi no Kuni after their leaders were successfully taken down in an assassination by Iwagakure Umbu. The fact that the Tsuchikage did not even attempt to hide his involvement in those assassinations early on felt a little strange to him. Alas, he had more gruesome matters to worry about. Unlike the Great Five Nations, the military strength of his village was not that commendable. He barely had a little over 2,000 battle-ready shinobi. And even among those, a third of them did not have experience in a real war. Although they possessed the Nanabai, their Jinchuriki wasn't entirely proficient in utilizing the Biju's chakra. Even so, the shinobi of his village would rather let Fu fight the enemy alone than fight alongside her. It saddened him greatly to see Fu get treated with such disdain because of the Biju sealed in her. Even after so many years, none of the villagers had come to accept her as one of them. And he was ashamed that he couldn't do anything personally to make her life easier. At times, the damn politics within the village infuriated him, that it left him unable to help a mere child. Right now, his only solace was his village's treaty with Konoha. It was their last resort, but it was an option on which he could depend upon. The Yondaime Hokage was a reputable man who was known for his kindness towards his allies and his ruthlessness towards his enemies. What a mess. Sighed Shibuki as he eyed all the documents on his desk once again. There isn't any point in overthinking about the matter, Shibuki. Right now, all we can do is prepare our shinobi for is to come. Based on their actions, it is inevitable that the village may very well fall under invasion. You're the leader. You are the person who must stay calm and strong at all times, came the strong voice of Senji, sitting on the other side of desk, going through some of the documents. He was the former village head of Takigakure and now an aide to Shibuki. He was an old man with a craggy face and long white hair. I hear what you say, Senji-sama. But, I still can't help but worry. Shibuki replied. Suddenly the door to his office busted open and in came a Chunin with a horrified look on his face. Shibuki-sama. There are 3 shinobi outside who have forcefully broken through the waterfall and are currently heading inside the village. The shinobi guarding the waterfall were killed but managed to confirm that one of them is Orochimaru of the Sannin while the identity of the other 2 is unknown, reported the Chunin hastily. Both Shibuki and Senji had stupefied looks on their faces upon hearing the news. The waterfall provided a natural barrier to Takigakure and wasn't an easy one to break through. Are you sure, it's just 3 shinobi? Shibuki questioned as he got up from his seat. Hi, Shibuki-sama. It's just the 3 of them. Our border patrol is scouting around the village for more enemy but so far, it looks like just those 3. 3 more squads of Jounin have gone to apprehend the 3 of them but we haven't gotten any reply from them yet. The Chunin replied. Get back to your post and ask all the Jounins to assemble near the entrance immediately. I will be out there in a few minutes. Stated Shibuki. Thereafter, the Chunin quickly left to carry out the given orders. Senji took in a deep breath to calm himself down. Knowing that something is going to happen is a lot different than actually going through that. He would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. Orochimaru was among the most nefarious criminals of the Fire Country and was a S-rank ninja. While their village did not have any Kage-level shinobi, Shibuki was the closest one to that title out of all the Takigakure ninjas. Shibuki, you go outside and handle the problem as best as you can. I will send out a distress letter to Konoha as soon as possible. And if the worst comes to pass, you do realize we'll be left with only 2 options. Senji said gravely. The tension was now clearly visible on the Takigakure leader's face. While he was nervous, he was willing to do anything to protect his own village. It was like Senji had said. He had to stay strong. His shinobi would be looking up to him for strength in this battle and he could not afford to let them down. His own father had sacrificed himself for Takigakure in the 3rd Shinobi War and now, he would have to muster up the same resolve. I appreciate it, Senji-sama. Let's hope we can hold our own until help arrives. Shibuki replied before rushing out of the building. A few minutes later, when Shibuki reached the entrance of the village, he came upon the ghastly image of bodies lying scattered across the ground. There were still a few shinobi who seemed to be alive, but one look at them could say that they were barely hanging on to their lives. His body trembled slightly upon seeing several faces of his lifeless friends and he unconsciously clenched his fists in anger. "You've finally come out to play, it seems, Shibuki." He immediately whipped his head in the direction of that sickly voice and found Orochimaru standing with a twisted smile on his face. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the two other shinobi standing behind the Sannin, but could not seem to place their names in his mind. The one standing to Orochimaru's left was a fair-skinned man with silver shaggy hair and dark-colored eyes. He had 3 markings on his face, one under each eye and one on his chin. He wore a blue armor with a distinctive white fur collar over a simple black suit. On the right was a dark-skinned man with a large build and well-defined muscle. He had a full head of white hair that flowed into his back and a long beard. His face had pronounced cheekbones and tear troughs under his eyes, and a prominent crease across his forehead with a mole above his right eyebrow. However, the peculiar characteristic about these two shinobi were the darkened sclerae and the marred cracks across their whole body. His curiosity rose greatly when he noticed the Konoha symbol on the hapuri worn by the silver-haired man and the typical Kumogakure attire worn by the other. His eyes widened in alarm and disbelief when he realized who exactly the two shinobi were. Naidame Hokage and Sandame Reikage. But, how is it possible? Both had perished during the previous shinobi wars. However, that wasn't his main concern now. Despite having faith in his abilities as a shinobi, there was no way he could fight 2 Kages and a Sannin all alone. It was simply impossible. Even with his trump card, he doubted it would make much difference. Alas, he would need to stand strong. "What purpose do you have in attacking our village, Orochimaru?" Shibuki genuinely asked, bringing his focus back to the matter at hand. He had to buy some time for all his shinobi to gather aptly. While he was aware he would not last much longer in a fight against these 3, he could at least buy some time for help to arrive from Konoha by using more numbers. Moreover, the Naidame Hokage and Sandame Reikage gave him a morbid feeling. He could only conclude that Orochimaru had found a way to revive the 2 former Kage using a Kenjutsu. Despite not being a censor, he could tell that the 2 had overwhelming power. And the way they stoically stood behind the snake Sannin as if waiting for his command, unnerved him greatly. You may say it's for a greater purpose. But, then again, that would be lying on my part. Just think of yourself as a sacrificial pawn. You're nothing but fodder, a means to an end. Orochimaru stated. Before Shibuki could even make a move, the silver-haired shinobi rushed at him with terrifying speed. Senji had already sent a distress message towards Konohagakure no Sato and hoped it would reach the village within 2 hours. Despite being in his old age and weakened considerably, he was still strong enough to fight his own battles given the situations. He was about to head out to help Shibuki when a jounin from the border patrol entered the office hastily. "Senji-sama, our border patrol has sensed a lot of chakra signatures heading towards us from the northwest. However, among them there are 2 enormous chakra signatures which resemble the Nanabi, most likely 2 Jinchuriki. I believe these shinobi are from Iwagakure," stated the jounin urgently. A look of panic formed on Senji's face on hearing the news. He weakly placed his hand on the desk for support as a bit of sweat began forming on his face. The situation was beginning to get worse by the minute. "Go look for Fu immediately. Based on the current situation, we will need all the help we can get," Senji replied firmly, after a few seconds of quick thinking. The jounin nodded in response and left the room promptly. There were only a handful of people in the village who cared about Fu's welfare. Having known the previous Jinchurikis for the Nanabi, Senji could sympathize with the enormous burden that was on Fu's shoulder. Yet, to this day he couldn't persuade his villagers to see otherwise. At the least, he always made sure that she received proper ninja training and essential necessities to live a simple life. Iwagakure no Sato held the 4 tails and the 5 tails. Moreover, their Jinchuriki had complete control over the Bijou. Rashi and Han, the Jinchuriki of 4 and 5 tails respectively, were feared within the elemental nation for their part in the second as well as third shinobi war and were regarded as S-rank shinobi in the bingo book. And right now, it pained him to throw Fu in a battle against them. He could only hope for a miracle at this point. Because, there was none in the village who could fend off all the enemies adequately. Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto currently stood in the middle of a clearing surrounded by tall hills. This ground was a little to the west of Konoha and was also regarded as a special ground among the entire Umbu unit of the village. This was the place where the Naidame Hokage had initiated the group of special shinobi intended only for Black Ops missions. His idea behind their formation, though simple, was ingenuine at that time. During the times of war, most of the villages used to be at a stalemate with each other, because of the information gathered by spies. Tobarama's ideology was that if the enemy did not have any knowledge of the group, they would fail to take the necessary actions against them. During the First Shinobi War, this strategy worked flawlessly. But, soon as the war ended, more villages came up with the idea of Umbu groups specialized in areas such as recon, infiltration, assassinations, and various more such departments, which had grown since that era. Ever since Shisui had resigned from Team Rohan a year ago or so, even Yugao had branched out from the group to join the recon unit of the Umbu. Though he was glad that she was now an Umbu captain and was faring well for herself, he was a little saddened that his group was splitting up. Currently, the ones in Team Rohan were him, Itachi, Mikasa, a Nara shinobi named Yuri, and the surprise addition of Sai. A few weeks after the Uchiha massacre, Naruto was made aware that Sai's sole purpose in joining the academy was to keep an eye of him, under Danzo's order. However, since Danzo's defection from the village, Sai, and a handful of more shinobi who were skeptical about Danzo's rule were integrated back into the regular Umbu, while the rest were brutally executed under the name of treason. He was pleasantly surprised when he was notified that Sai would be joining the group. Finally, there was someone of his age. Coming out of his dazed state, he looked up to see that Mikasa was standing firm in her stance with her katana in her arms. Other than Yugao, who often gave him an earful as an older sister, Mikasa was more like his partner in crime. She was a reserved person, who mainly spoke when it was necessary. Much like Itachi, which often made him chuckle. However, he knew she cared for him. He was pleasantly surprised and slightly embarrassed to learn that it was Yugao and Mikasa who looked after him for a few months after his mother's death. Embarrassed cause, he still found it strange to comprehend that the two kunoichi had seen him unclothed. On many occasions, Naruto and Mikasa would come to this area to practice kenjutsu. Well, it was mainly Mikasa giving out tips to Naruto to improve upon with his chikudo. Since Naruto did not have anyone to teach him kenjutsu, whatever he knew up to the point he joined Umbu, he had learned on his own. While he was proficient enough with a sword, he wasn't a kenjutsu master like Mikasa, who had been dabbling with this art for the past 20 years. "You look tired, Naruto. Had enough already?" Mikasa taunted with a small smile as she wiped some sweat off her forehead. "Heh, you wish," replied Naruto. Once again, charging his sword with Raitun chakra, he dashed towards the kunoichi, who in turn did the same. A few seconds later, their swords met in a resounding clash. For a few moments, they battled for supremacy. Seeing as he was losing the battle in strength slightly, Naruto loosened his grip and ducked down to sweep Mikasa off her feet. Having already anticipated that, Mikasa jumped up and brought her sword down on the blonde shinobi. Quickly powering off the attack with the sword now in his left hand, he jumped back up to his feet. Instead of jumping back to gain some distance, he swiftly closed the distance between Mikasa and him and tried to slash the kunoichi from the left. Yet again, Mikasa gracefully deflected that blow. However, she was surprised when another Naruto popped up from behind who also had a chikudo in his hand and ran up to her from her rear. "That sly little fox," thought Mikasa with a chuckle. Making a single-hand sign with her free hand, she surrounded herself with Raitun chakra and sent bolts of electricity towards the Kage Bunshin. However, that momentary lapse of concentration had costed her. The Naruto in front of her had swiftly hit her right shoulder with the hilt of his chikudo, making it slightly sore. While she had managed to destroy that single Bunshin, she now also had a disadvantage. "That was well played, Naruto, I will give you that. A bit unorthodox, but nice," Mikasa complimented. Naruto smiled on hearing that. He was after all a specialist and it came to unorthodox moves. However, their sparring soon came to an end, when another Umbu came amidst them. "Washi-senpai, Usagi-senpai, Hokage-sama has summoned you immediately," stated the Umbu. The two gave a curt nod and the Umbu soon disappeared from the premises. "I really hope it's for some mission. I have been getting bored as hell inside the village," Naruto said exasperatedly. Mikasa shook her head at his whining, but she couldn't blame him. She too was getting a little impatient being inside the confines of the village. Hokage office. About 10 minutes later, when Naruto and Mikasa entered the office, Naruto was surprised to see the rest of his team also assembled here. He noticed the grave expression on his father's and Shikaku's face and realized the upcoming mission must be of utmost importance. His suspicion was further confirmed when seconds later, the elders, Koharu and Hamura also walked into the Hokage's office. "What is so important that you had to even summon us, Minato?" Koharu questioned. Despite being in her old age, she was a veteran shinobi who served directly under Tobarama Senju along with Hamura. The two elders had fought in all the past shinobi wars, and as such their inputs in the important decisions pertaining to Konoha was always welcomed by Minato. After Danzo's defection, he had secretly kept the two under strict watches and was satisfied when he found no discrepancies in their behavior. Losing two great tactical minds as these two would have certainly dealt a huge blow to Konohagakure no Sato. Minato looked around once and wordlessly ordered all the other Umbu to leave the room. Once they were gone, he made a few hand seals and erected a sound barrier around the room. Now that everyone's here, I'll brief everyone on the news. About half an hour ago, we received a distress message from Takigakure no Sato. This seemed to get everyone's attention as their ears perked up on hearing that slight bit of information. Itachi's calculative mind had already begun listing up the possibilities for such an action and concluded upon the reason soundly in a matter of few seconds. About a couple of hours ago, Takigakure was invaded by Orochimaru and two more unknown shinobi. The message was sent by Senji-sama, the former village head of Takigakure and an aide to Shibuki, the current leader. The shinobi guards at the entrance of the village were killed and Shibuki had personally gone to intervene the three invaders. He has asked for our assistance in dealing with them. Minato revealed. Based on our intel, we believe Tsuchi no Kuni is involved in this matter. In the last 2 years, Tsuchi no Kuni has successfully invaded and captured the land of bear, the land of birds and the land of grass. They are gradually increasing their territory and moving towards Hai no Kuni. However, I believe that Tsuchikage plans to invade Takigakure, not for geographical advantage, but for the bijou. They already possess 2 bijou and gaining a third one will definitely augment their power as a great nation. Shikaku stated. Minato nodded his head, concurring with his advisor's line of thought. What bijou does Takigakure hold? Voiced Naruto curiously. He was aware that Iwagakure had possession of the 4 and 5 tails, but Takigakure was still a mystery to him. Mikasa prudently glanced towards her blonde teammate with a little worry. She was conscious about his feelings towards the bijou. Initially it sounded absurd to hear him call a bijou his friend, but over time she had learned to accept that. Just cause whole her life she was taught to dislike something, doesn't mean she couldn't try to see it differently. During the formation of the village system, Shodai-sama had given the Nanabai to Takigakure as a sign of friendship and goodwill for their support to the village. Currently, the bijou is housed in a girl named Fu, who's about your age. Washi. Minato replied. Is my team going to be sent for this mission, Hokage-sama? Itachi asked up straight. However, Naruto could feel the slight dilemma in his heart. While Itachi was confident in his team's abilities, there were several unknown factors that could compromise this mission. That is correct, Karasu. Even though we have recovered our military strength greatly in the past 2 years, we can't afford to send too many shinobi. Takigakure may be our allies, but this very well could turn out to be a trap. That's why I have decided to send a select few dependable shinobi. Shikaku confirmed. Minato rested his arms on his desk and closed his eyes momentarily to clear his head. There indeed were a lot of uncertainties prevailing this mission. Before anyone else, he had to look after his own shinobi and village. He was slightly surprised that the elders had not uttered a single word till now. What are your thoughts, Koharu-sama, Hamura-sama? Minato questioned, glancing towards them. Anything that involves Orochimaru is never a good sign. Anoki has never been one to give up on past grudges. You should be certain that it is a trap. Orochimaru may be a hideous criminal, but he's not stupid. He's aware that Takigakure would very well ask Konoha for assistance. He wouldn't attack the village alone, if he did not have someone backing him up. Most likely Danzo and Anoki. Koharu replied rather grumpily. Naruto clenched his fists slightly on hearing that shinobi's name. He hated Danzo with passion. He was the sole reason for the Uchiha massacre and for getting Hinata involved in that incident 2 years back. He swore back then, he would end his life one way or another. Danzo and Orochimaru both pose an enormous threat to Konoha. Moreover, their knowledge about the village is far too much to be left unchecked. And if they are colluding with our enemies, Hai no Kuni may become their next target of invasion. They need to be dealt with as soon as possible. I would suggest sending only Karasu, Washi, Usagi, Sai, and Kakashi for the mission. Having fought in the previous war, Kakashi and Usagi have a better knowledge of the terrain over there. Hamura suggested strategically. The room became quiet as everyone awaited the Hokage's decision. Minato pondered over the matter for few more minutes before getting up from his seat. I agree with Hamura-sama. Karasu, Washi, Usagi, Sai, and Kakashi seem a good fit for the mission. If Danzo is involved, sending in Shursui may turn out to be quite hazardous. However, your objective in this mission is mainly to observe and to ensure the safety of the Jinchuriki, Senji-sama, and Shibuki-sama. Your secondary mission would be to eliminate Danzo Shimura and Orochimaru. If you do encounter any Iwagakure shinobi, either kill them or capture their lead commander for interrogation. Your team will be going in alone and you'll have no backup whatsoever. Minato stated firmly. Get going and ready up for the mission. You'll be leaving in 20 minutes. Minato said. Itachi, Naruto, and Mikasa used Shunshin to disappear from the office, while Hamura and Koharu used the more traditional way and made their exit via the door. Shikaku, get me Kakashi and Sai in here immediately. Shikaku too disappeared from the office and made his way to the Umbu headquarters. 20 minutes later at the northern Konoha gate. By the time Naruto arrived at the gate, he noticed that everyone was already waiting for him. He had a sheepish look on his face on realizing he was a tad bit late. In his earlier days, Itachi had always reprimanded him for not being on time. You sure took your time, Washi. Kakashi stated sarcastically. Naruto's eye twitched on hearing that remark. Hey, you don't get to say that. You're always late for everything. Naruto replied pointedly. Mikasa chuckled softly on seeing the banter between the two while Itachi and Sai stoically stood in their place. The two hardly spoke to each other, if it wasn't pertaining to their mission. Despite all the differences between all of them, there was no doubt that Team Rohan probably was the foremost when it came to teamwork. Alright, that's enough. I assume everyone has packed adequately for this mission. It won't be a walk in the park. We'll always need to have our guard up from the moment we leave Hai no Kuni. We'll infiltrate Takigakure from the east and make our way to the rear of the village from there on. It'll take us approximately 2 hours or so if we travel using Sai's ink birds. Kakashi said seriously. Everyone took in the words of their captain and nodded in unison. Ninpo, Choja Giga, Sai said after drawing 3 birds in his scroll. Immediately, the 3 birds leapt from the scroll and grew to life-size form. Naruto and Kakashi sat on one, Itachi and Mikasa took the second while Sai sat on the last one. Within a few seconds, the birds took off into the air and headed towards the direction of Takigakure. An hour later in Takigakure. Despite all the constant hatred and fighting that always surrounded the elemental nations, the minor villages always provided a sort of haven for those who wished to distance themselves from the life of a shinobi. Due to their inferior military strength, the Great Five Nations never showed much interest in such places. But all of that had begun to fade in the last couple of years, when Tsuchi no Kuni first invaded the land of birds, then consequently the land of birds and the land of grass. And the land of waterfall was no such exception. In the shinobi world, power alone dictates everything. Because Konoha has always come out on top in the past 3 shinobi wars, no one dared challenge the strongest village openly. The sheer number of exceptionally strong shinobi that have come out of Konoha has always seemed to unnerve the other nations. So, it was only a matter of time before one of the great nations decided to make a move against Konohagakure no Sato. Takigakure no Sato was generally known for its lush green land, tall hills on the north and east and especially the beautiful waterfalls in the area. The village itself was hidden by a gigantic waterfall which provided a natural barrier against threats. However, all of that would seem unreal now. If one were to enter the village now, they would come across the ghastly scene of dead bodies scattered all over the village. The buildings were mostly broken down and large chunks of rocks were lying all around. The ground was covered with water, but instead of being clear, it flowed red with the blood of the fallen shinobi. The air reeked of death and frankly at first glance, one may think, the Shinigami himself had walked upon these lands. However, among all the scattered bodies, there were still some who were barely clinging on to their life. But, for the fear of losing whatever precious time they had, they did not dare move a muscle. In the center of the village, near the village leader's office stood 7 people. While 4 of them had unreadable expressions on their face, one had the look of pure amusement on his. Coo. I'm surprised you and your pet have managed to survive for so long, Shibuki. Orochimaru taunted with a maniacal laugh. Shibuki was down on one knee, clutching the right side of his stomach, to stop the bleeding. His entire body was almost covered in blood which gave him the appearance of a wild beast. Beside him stood Fu, who appeared to be even more beaten down. Her skin was burnt red due to the overusage of the Bija chakra and she knew any moment she would embrace the ground, like many others. She felt as if she may die just by standing for a few more minutes. Shibuki cursed out loud as he once again looked around himself with a horrified look on his face. How could it come to this, was the only thought running through his mind. In all his life, he had never come across so much death and destruction. Looking at his left hand, he knew this would be his final stance. He had one vial of the Ayu no Mizu, hero water, left. Once he would drink it, he should be able to stall the enemy long enough for Konoha Shinobi to arrive. Looking to his right, he saw Fu wasn't faring much well. He had to ensure her safety at least. Watching her grow as a child, he had begun to view her as his own daughter. For the first time, he was glad that the Nanabai was sealed into her. That at least would ensure she wouldn't succumb to death right away. His hand trembled in trepidation as he clutched that single vial and brought it close to his mouth. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes on seeing Shibuki's actions but decided to entertain the simpleton for another round. His eyes were set on a larger picture, which he assumed would be arriving soon. Fu, stand down. You have fought bravely for this village and I really am proud of you. As the leader of this village, it is my responsibility to ensure your safety. Fu wanted to argue, she wanted to yell at him for not doing anything stupid. Alas, she did not have any energy left to speak her mind. She was aware of what Shibuki was going to do and tears freely slipped from her eyes, realizing this may be last time she'll get to see him. She forced her body to stand up, but subsequently, her mind went blank as unconsciousness gripped onto her tightly. Seeing as she was unconscious, Shibuki immediately drank the last vial of Ayu no Mizu, as he felt his body getting rejuvenated by the influx of strong chakra. With defiant eyes, he once again stood up and settled into his stance to protect what he cherished. I assume that was the last of your Ayu no Mizu, Shibuki. I must say, the mystery surrounding that special form of liquid intrigues even me. Your body would certainly make a great way for me research what exactly it does to a shinobi's body. Orochimaru stated with keen interest. Since that liquid wasn't available anywhere other than Takigakure, one rarely ever got to see its effects. But, even he wouldn't have imagined the great power ingesting that liquid provides, albeit temporarily. Still, he couldn't wait to inspect its properties after he was done with all this. Your disregard for life will one day be your greatest downfall, Orochimaru. Seethed Shibuki as he got his chakra under control. He would need to play this out strategically. At least, until the Konoha Shinobi came. He didn't know who would come, but he will be betting all his hopes on that group. Orochimaru, get rid of this nuisance quickly. Tsuchikage-sama will be here momentarily. He doesn't want to dirty his hands for a matter such as this. And make sure the Jinchuriki is not harmed any further. We need her alive. Stated a large, tall man. He was heavily armored, wearing what was commonly known as a steam armor with a furnace on the back for emitting steam. He had light brown eyes and his red armor extended all the way to the bottom half of his face, covering it up. Underneath the armor, covering his face, he wore a white cloth which also covered both sides of his face and the top of his head. He also wore a red kasa over the white cloth which seemed to be composed of the same material as his armor. Over the armor, he also wore a bronze-colored ring around his neck. This man was commonly known as Han, Joki no Jinchuriki, the Jinchuriki of Gobi, the Five Tails. Oh. I wasn't aware that the Tsuchikage himself would choose to come over here. Orochimaru replied, glancing to his right. Tsuchikage-sama wanted an audience with the Hokage's son, Naruto Namikaze. You don't need to know anything further than that. This time it was Rashi, who had replied. Known as Yotan no Rashi throughout the elemental nations, this Iwagakure shinobi was the Jinchuriki of Yanbi, the Four Tails. Rashi was a shinobi in his mid-40s, but his power had never dwindled despite his age. He had red hair, mustache and beard which tapered off to a point. He wore a large headpiece consisting of a three-pointed crown-like ridge, bearing his Iwagakure forehead protector, a ring and a prominent black piece of armor running across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose. Hao wore long-sleeved magenta kimono shirt and pants, with mesh armor shirt and fitted black suit underneath, along with calf-length sandals. Despite portraying a tough appearance, he was slightly unnerved by his actions today. Rashi and him essentially slaughtered the entire village, on the orders of their Tsuchikage. His hands were stained in blood, yet he could not bring himself to bring forth a shred of emotion for the fallen bodies. As you say, Rashi-san, Han-san. Orochimaru replied vacantly. Turning his attention back to Shibuki, he was sure the man wouldn't last much longer. Yet seeing his feeble attempts was fascinating. He never did find any meaning in life, because it was after all limited. A minuscule moment in the cosmic scale of events. He had his eyes set on the prospect of immortality, where he could unroot the underlying secrets of chakra. Despite the concept of chakra existing among humans for the past millennia, no one had ever uncovered all its secrets. Where did it originate from? What did it originate from? Were humans always born with chakra, or did someone distribute chakra among the humans? As a scientist, he had an endless list of questions, to which he had no answers. He was brought out of his musings when he heard Shibuki move from his spot. It wouldn't hurt him to entertain the fool himself after watching Shibuki struggle for so long. As the two shinobi ran towards each at an impressive speed, they met halfway through with their elbows clashing against each other's. While the Sannin hadn't put all his strength, he was surprised that Shibuki was able to match him. The two battled for dominance for a few seconds, but both seemed to be equally matched. However, Shibuki suddenly jumped up when he saw several snakes appear out of Orochimaru's sleeves towards him. Making several hand seals while in mid-air, he called out the name of his jutsu. Suiton, Suigaden, the water from the surrounding area rose to great heights to form a spinning drill which then proceeded towards the snake Sannin at incredible speeds. In return, Orochimaru performed his own strings of hand seals, Doton, Doryu Heki, an enormous mud wall rose up from the ground and the Suiton jutsu fired by Shibuki crashed into the wall. As he landed on the ground, Shibuki picked up several shuriken from the ground and threw them towards the wall, once he coated them with futon chakra. As the shurikens burst through the walls, Shibuki punched the wall with great strength, making the debris fly over on the other side. Futon, Detapa, Orochimaru announced, as he blew a large wall of air from his mouth, thus making the debris fall all around him. Orochimaru was now momentarily surprised to see that Shibuki had already covered the distance between them and was now aiming for his neck, with a katana in his hand. The Sannin expertly ducked below the swing and punched the Taki village leader in his abdomen, making him fly back. Shibuki finally came to an abrupt halt as his body hit a wall behind him, cracking it slightly. He was given no time to recover, as he saw Orochimaru was now a feet away from him. Quickly getting back on his feet, Shibuki swatted away the punch aimed for his jugular and went for a punch of his own at Orochimaru's neck. His eyes widened greatly when he saw the Sannin's neck elongate to great lengths, thereby dodging his punch. It was simply unnatural as per Shibuki. Not willing to lose any momentum, Shibuki then feinted a hand seal with his right hand, which caught the Sannin off guard. Catching on to that moment, Shibuki planted a firm punch on Orochimaru's abdomen and sent him soaring all the way back. "Oh!" groaned Orochimaru as he got up from all the rubble beside him. That did hurt a little. But, this fight was turning out to be an interesting experiment for him. It was his first time fighting a shinobi who had consumed the Ayu no Mizu. If a small vial of that liquid could give a shinobi such power, he couldn't even imagine the power this liquid would give a shinobi, if he could manage separate the side effects from it and make it sustainable for longer periods. Shibuki wasn't surprised when he saw Orochimaru get up from under all that debris of rocks as if nothing had happened. But he realized that his body was beginning to get a little stiff. Just a little while longer. "I can't give up yet," he thought desperately. "Why do you fight, Shibuki? You must have realized by now that you have no chance of winning against me," Orochimaru stated as he dusted his clothes. "A person like you wouldn't understand what I fight for. My village had never interfered in the great village's business or took any action that may appear to be unreasonable to anyone. Yet, we were targeted by Iwagakure. What did we do to deserve this?" yelled Shibuki in frustration. Orochimaru gave no outward reaction to that outburst, nor did he have any pity for the shinobi. "Are you stalling for the Konoha shinobi to come and rescue you? Is that what you're doing? Surely you must have thought we would be prepared if such a situation presented itself. In fact, allow me let you in on a little secret," said an amused Orochimaru. Meanwhile, Shibuki had a morbid feeling develop in him as he heard Orochimaru's words. "We were counting on you to approach Konoha for assistance. Our main objective was to lure out the Konoha shinobi. And I'm also sure of who the Hokage is going to send for your assistance. I must thank you for making go everything according to plan. Shibuki-sama." Orochimaru stated the last part with a mock bow. Shibuki took a step back in fear as he realized what he had done. His mind went through a frenzy of thoughts as he understood why the enemy was taking their time. Initially it did seem odd to him that only 3 people had come to attack the village. But now that he looked at everything that had transpired in the last 3 hours, it all made sense to him. Attacking the village in small numbers at first that gave the village a false sense of hope that with a little extra help the enemy could be defeated. And once the request for help had been sent, more attackers joined in, killing off anyone who could send a word out. It was this momentary lapse of concentration that also costed Shibuki greatly. he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. As he looked down, his eyes widened in fear when he saw a katana sticking out of his chest. Looking in front of him, the Orochimaru standing there dissolved into mud as he realized what had happened. "Boo, but when?" whispered Shibuki as spat out some blood. "That's not important now, is it?" asked Orochimaru rhetorically, as he took his katana out of Shibuki's chest. A few seconds later, Shibuki fell on the ground as it became unbearable for him to stand. Tears fell from his eyes like a dam as he realized this was the end for Takigakure. His simple dream of living a peaceful life among those he cherished seemed like eons away. Slowly looking at the cruel reality all around himself, there was only one thought going through his mind. "Someone, anyone, please help." Seeing as Shibuki would fall unconscious any moment, without any further, Orochimaru walked back towards Han and Rashi. Team Rohan would be arriving at Takigakure very soon now, and he couldn't wait to meet the young Namikes about whom he had heard so much about. "South of Takigakure. How much further are we from Takigakure, Inu?" asked Washi urgently. "Not much. A little less than 5 miles. "Why do you ask?" Kakashi questioned as he kept checking the ground below, in front of him. "We need to hurry. I can sense only a few chakra signatures standing inside the village. I can't say for certain what may have happened, but something doesn't feel right to me," stated Naruto worriedly. He had a real bad feeling developing in his gut. The chakra signatures he felt were nothing to scoff at. All of them were extremely powerful, and he was certain there were also 2 Jinchuriki amidst them. Kakashi deeply trusted Naruto, and the blonde's instinct as a ninja hardly ever proved to be wrong. Calling out to the other members of the team, he relayed the message to them via hand signals. Once the message was clear to everyone, Sai commanded the bird to fly even faster. About 20 minutes later, Team Rohan had finally reached the outskirts of the village. They landed on the eastern side of the village, and as they neared the entrance, their eyes could not believe the scene that was before them. In simple words, it was pure slaughter. Even outside the entrance of the village, the sheer number of dead shinobis that lay about was disturbing. While Kakashi, Mikasa and Itachi were no stranger to such sights, Naruto and even Sai were having a tad bit more difficult time to comprehend the events that may have transpired to lead to this result. There were at least more than 100 shinobi lying dead just outside the village entrance, and judging from their state, they were killed a couple of hours ago. "This is serious, Inu Taicho," Mikasa commented blankly. "I realize that. Judging from the number of bodies here, we should expect a lot more inside." Even though Takigakure wasn't as strong as a great village, their military strength wasn't so weak either. They had some exceptional shinobi too, Kakashi replied, as he walked past a shinobi who had a large hole in his chest. "I can feel the chakra signatures coming from the center of village," spoke Naruto. His anger was rising with every passing second. He could still sense some of the shinobi who were barely clinging on to their life. "This is a cruel reality which you must accept, Naruto. War and death have been the constants in the human history," Kurama stated upon viewing the hundreds of dead shinobi. As the group walked past the entrance of the village, all of them took to the tree tops as the stench of blood had become even stronger. As far as their eyes could see, the only image their brain registered was that of a dead shinobi. While most of them had the Takigakure forehead protector, some had the symbol of Iwagakure on theirs. Hokage-sama and Shikaku-san were correct in their assumptions after all. It was the work of Iwagakure no Sato. Sai replied flatly as his eyes scanned his surroundings for any sort of movement. The only one who hadn't uttered anything until now was Itachi. Without any shred of emotion visible on his face, Itachi simply looked around the village, observing everything his Sharingan took notice of. One could call the eyes of an Uchiha a curse, since those never forget anything they see. The battlefield in front of him reminded him of the very first time he had seen the Third Shinobi War, at a young age of 5. That was also the first time he had taken another's life. The group traveled a little deeper into the village where most of the buildings were destroyed and came across an even horrific scene. Every member of the group had their chakra suppressed to their bare minimum to have even a slight chance of surprise against the enemy, and more importantly to assess the area a little more. As they neared an area, which Kakashi assumed was the market district of the village, he held his hand up and immediately everyone stopped behind him. Naruto and Itachi moved beside their team captain. It was the young Namikaze who let out an inaudible gasp at the scene before him. The entire area was filled with water, indicating signs of Suiton Jutsu, but the strange aspect was the red color of the water. Almost all the buildings were destroyed badly, and there were rubbles lying across with dead bodies of countless shinobi floating about. Naruto suddenly narrowed his eyes when he felt the 5 chakra signatures move towards their location. Inu Taicho, they know we're here. There's no point in hiding anymore. Naruto said, placing his hand on the hilt of his Chikuto. A few seconds later, Team Rohan jumped down onto the ground as their enemy came into view. We have been expecting you. Kakashi, Mikasa, Itachi, and Naruto-kun. Orochimaru said gleefully. Everything had gone perfectly as he'd expected until now, and he would make sure to get his prize by the end of the day. Orochimaru, how low have you fallen to work with the Wagakure shinobi of all people? Kakashi replied, not even concerned by the fact that Orochimaru knew all their identities. We are shinobi, Kakashi. We all have our own motives. It just so happens that my interests align with that of the Wagakure currently. But, I must say, I expected you all to reach a lot quicker. You missed all the fun, said the snake Sannin, pointing both his arms towards the dead shinobi lying around. Naruto took a step forward in anger on seeing the blatant disrespect the man showed, but stopped when Itachi placed a hand before him, blocking his path. So, that's the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, huh? Rashi said keenly. He could feel the strong power within the boy, and honestly, he did not wish to fight another child today. He's strong, Rashi. You feel it, don't you? Asked Han with a serious face. Out of all the Konoha shinobi, he felt most weary of the blonde kid. He could not really reason why, since the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was only a kid and from the information given to him, had never utilized Bija Chakra. Orochimaru chuckled on seeing the reaction from the young lad. Quite the impatient one, aren't you, Naruto-kun? Or should I say Kuroshir? Naruto took a deep breath and composed himself as he looked at the situation analytically. They were facing 2 Jinchurikis and a Sannin. He still felt 2 more chakra signatures, a little further away, but couldn't say who it was. But, those 2 people had terrifyingly strong chakra. He couldn't let his emotions get in the way. Consider yourself to be a dead man walking, Orochimaru. Today's the last day you take a breath amongst the living, replied Naruto coldly. Those are some big words, Naruto-kun. Are you sure you'll be able to back them up? Orochimaru replied with a smirk as he stretched his arms to loosen them up. Calm down, Naruto. Keep your focus. Kakashi intervened as he stepped forward. Itachi and Naruto will go after Rashi and Han, while Mikasa, Sai, and I will go after Orochimaru. And remember the mission at hand. Our primary objective is not to kill the people before us. However, before any of them could make a move, Orochimaru quickly placed both his palms together. The very next second, 2 more people landed before them, that made most of members of Team Rohan take a step back in fear. Impossible, said both Mikasa and Sai, barely audible to the others. You perfected even that jutsu? Kakashi commented in disbelief. Minato-sensei had told him about the experiments Orochimaru was working on before he deserted the Leaf. But, to think the Sannin would pull this move here, he wouldn't have thought about it in his wildest dreams. Naidame Hokage and Sandame Reikage. What jutsu is this, Inu Taicho? Itachi asked curiously. Both the Kages had died during the previous war, and he wasn't aware of any jutsu that could revive the dead. It was a kenjutsu developed by Naidame Hokage himself, called the Edo Tensei. It's used to revive the dead using human sacrifices. Kakashi replied as he steadied himself. The situation just became a whole lot worse than previously assumed. Their team could have probably handled the 2 Iwa Jinchuriki and forced Orochimaru to retreat, but facing 2 reanimated Kages was simply suicide. Now that he thought about it, it all makes sense as to how the entire Takigakure no Sato was annihilated so easily. Are you aware of any weaknesses about this jutsu? Questioned Itachi. I'm afraid, I don't have much knowledge regarding this kenjutsu. I did not think that Orochimaru would be able to actually master this jutsu. Kakashi replied frankly. Itachi nodded and turned towards the 2 Kages again. Every jutsu had a weakness, he just had to be calm and keep trying until he found one. Naruto took in every word of what Kakashi had said and understood the situation at hand. Looking towards Itachi, both nodded at each other. It was time. None of them had ever fought anyone to their extent in quite a few years. It was time Iwagakure realized why Konoha was feared as the strongest among all the villages. The 2 Uchihas stepped forward and it was Itachi who spoke first. Inu Taicho. Naruto and I will take care of the Naidame Hokage and Sandame Reikage. Whatever plans we had come up with up to this point will most likely fail. I'm sure you can tell that, yeah? Seeing the 2 of them, Kakashi calmed himself. This wasn't the time for him to cower behind his juniors. Itachi, Naruto, you guys better not die today. I won't forgive any of you, if you do. Mikasa exclaimed, stepping beside them and giving the two a rare smile. Sai felt a strange sensation form within himself as he saw the members of his team. While en route, he was rigorously taught not to care about anything or anyone other than the mission. But, the more time he had spent with these people, the more felt himself changing. Talking to Naruto often reminded him of his brother, who too had a strong will like the young Namikaze. Without any further talks, Naruto and Itachi ran towards the two reanimated Kages, while Kakashi, Mikasa and Sai focused their attention on Han, Rashi and Orochimaru. They all knew, their chances of victory were slim and some of them may very well die in today's fight, but they had already made peace with that. Naruto and Itachi vs Naidame Hokage and Sandaime Reikage. Naruto and Itachi now stood opposite to the two Kages, who stared back at the two Konoha shinobi blankly. Both the Uchihas had already removed their masks by now, since there wasn't any point in wearing them anymore as the enemy was already aware of their identities. Weaving through hand seals quickly, Naruto and Itachi called out the names of their jutsu simultaneously. Futon, Renkuden, Naruto said, inhaling large amounts of air and then expelling consecutive spherical wind projectiles. Katon, Karyu Enden, Itachi said, exhaling a stream of fire in the shape of a large dragon from his mouth. As the Futon and Katon jutsu combined with each other, the intensity of the flames became even stronger as it proceeded towards their opponent. The heat radiating from the jutsu was so high that Orochimaru had to jump back quite a distance to protect himself from any exterior burns. Tobirama Senju stepped forward and performed a single-hand seal. Suetun, Suijin Hiki, the Naidame Hokage then proceeded to blow out a jet of water from his mouth and formed a barrier around them to act as a barrier against the incoming attack. Naruto and Itachi were shocked that the Naidame performed such a high-level jutsu with only a single-hand seal. That just showed the level of mastery the man had over the water element. As the two jutsus collided, there was a large explosion as the entire air became covered with mist. Since both Naruto and Itachi had their Sharingan active, they could handle themselves relatively well, but the density of fog hindered even their vision to some extent. From the corner of his eyes, Naruto spotted a movement beside Itachi, and immediately pushed him away. A second later Naruto found himself on the receiving end of a punch from the Sandaime Reikage who seemed to have teleported behind them. Naruto swiftly flew back in between all the rubbles and hit the wall harshly. On seeing that, Itachi promptly moved towards the Reikage to intercept him. As the two shinobi partook in a taijutsu battle, Itachi found it exceedingly difficult to keep up with the bulky Reikage. Itachi's eyes then morphed into the Mangekyo Sharingan as it became slightly easier to cope up. As he aimed a punch to Itachi's left side, he blocked it with his arm but cringed a little at the strength behind it. Reacting quickly again, Itachi bent down to sweep the Reikage from the ground, who jumped high up in the air and formed a fist with 4 fingers sticking out. Jigakuzuki, Yanhan no Kite, the Sandaime Reikage said as he concentrated high amount of Raitun chakra into his fist. With 4 fingers extended, he came falling towards Itachi who was highly alarmed. As the Reikage came close to Itachi, there was a huge explosion as his fingers were being blocked by a red skeletal figure. Itachi stood inside his Susanoo, panting slightly as he felt his body become a little sore. It was times like these that Itachi was grateful that Naruto had the Rinnegan. With the Rinnegan abilities, Naruto frequently eased off Itachi's pain, whenever his eyesight would feel bad or his body acted up in pain. However, Itachi could not afford to lose his focus as the Reikage had now switched to 3 fingers. Itachi exerted more chakra into his Susanoo to make it more durable but his eyes widened even further when the Reikage switched to 1 finger. Tearing through Itachi's Susanoo, the Sandaime Reikage stabbed Itachi in his chest, just above his heart. Coughing up blood, Itachi somehow still stood his ground as he stopped his Susanoo from wavering. As Naruto got up after being thrown towards the wall, he noticed that Orochimaru was simply standing back and observing the fights with an amused expression on his face. He was, however, brought out his thoughts when the Naidame Hokage landed before him. "So, I guess, I'll have to fight you, huh?" Naruto replied, as his own Sharingan morphed into the Mangekyo Sharingan and his Rinnegan glowed bright silver. Making Raitun chakra circulate through his body for quicker responses, he quickly moved towards the Senju with his Chikudo drawn. His Chikudo met with the second Hokage's kunai with a resounding sound. The two battled for supremacy for a good minute when Naruto smirked upon getting an idea. Loosening his grip on the Chikudo, he slipped under the Naidame Hokage and aimed a punch on the man's back with his fist coated with chakra. However, Naruto was surprised when Tobirama jumped up and landed a little back, dodging his punch. Not wasting any time, Naruto once again rushed towards deceased Hokage with much more speed than before. Before Tobirama could even react, Naruto thrusted his hand towards the Kage's shoulder, which had a swirling ball of chakra. Rasengan, Naruto said as he planted his hand on Tobirama's right shoulder, making the Hokage stumble back quite a bit. Now, any normal shinobi would have died from that impact. But, as Naruto jumped back after a few minutes, he noticed a peculiar thing. The upper right torso of the Senju, which was blown away from his Rasengan, was now repairing itself slowly. Initially, he was slightly surprised when the man did not even attempt to dodge that blow. That is not a healing ability, since he is already dead. It must be an effect of the Edo Tensei Jutsu. This is going to be more difficult than I thought. Naruto thought irritatingly. To his left, he could see that Itachi was having a hard time on keeping up with the Raikage. With a large body and superhuman strength and reflexes, the Sandaime Raikage was clearly a bad match for the elder Uchiha clan heir. However, his heart began racing faster when he saw the Raikage stab Itachi just in the chest. Extending both his arms swiftly, one aiming for the Nidaime Hokage and the other for the Sandaime Raikage, Naruto called out to Itachi urgently. "Itachi, do it now," yelled Naruto. Manipulating the gravity around the two Kages, Naruto pulled the Kage towards each other with tremendous force. Tobirama and A tried moving their body, but it was to no avail. As the two Kages neared each other, through sheer willpower Itachi's Susanoo developed further as its color now changed to slightly orange. The skeletal head was now framed by locks of hair, with an appendage on its chin reminiscent of a pharaoh's false beard. The Susanoo's body also gained an armor and resembled a long-nosed Tengu ethereal warrior that wore a pair of Magatama earrings. Yasaka no Magatama, 3 Magatama bound together by a single, circular thread that were created between Itachi Susanoo's hands were then propelled towards Tobirama and A. As the jutsu collided with the two shinobi, the entire area rocked with a great force as everyone had to stick to the ground unless being risked flung away. As the smoke began to clear out a little, Naruto was satisfied when there wasn't anything left of the two shinobi. However, his face soon turned to frown when slowly but surely their body began piecing itself together. Moving quickly, Naruto formed several black rods from his right hand and appeared behind the two Kages and implanted 4 black rods into each of them before they could react. The black rods inserted by Naruto had his own chakra inside of them, and by injecting the black rods in the chakra points, Naruto interfered with their chakra system, thus rooting them in their place and disabling their movements. This would stop them from moving around anymore. "Itachi, you should seal them with your..." Naruto said, taking breaths as he turned to look at Itachi. But his face lost all color when he saw his friend knelt on the ground with heavy breaths, and by the looks of it, he would fall unconscious any moment. However, what scared him most was the fact that Orochimaru was now just a few feet behind Itachi with his katana drawn out, and the fact that Rashi was now standing surrounded by his Jinchuriki cloak. "I'm not going to make there in time. God damn it," Naruto thought urgently. With every passing second, his heart was racing faster as he realized his friend was going to die. With Kakashi, Mikasa and Sai against Han, Rashi. Kakashi, Mikasa and Sai were having a relatively harder time compared to Naruto and Itachi. One would expect a shinobi's strength to dwindle slightly from their prime age when they passed their 40s. This was especially true when it came to shinobi. However, Han and Rashi were pure monsters when it came to taijutsu, and Orochimaru wasn't making it any easier for them. While Kakashi and Mikasa weren't severely injured, that was not the case with Sai. Since Sai primarily utilized ink-based ninjutsu, against Rashi's Yotan-based attack and Han's steam-based attack, his ninjutsu was not much useful. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," Kakashi said as he formed a single clone. The clones in Kakashi's hands began sparkling with electricity and then joined together to form a rope of sorts, made with continuous stream of electricity. The clone and Kakashi then ran towards Rashi with high speed, cutting through all the lava-covered rocks in the process. As the clone and Kakashi neared Rashi, a large red tail appeared from Rashi's back as he attempted to swat Kakashi and his clone away. However, he howled in pain when Mikasa suddenly jumped in front of Kakashi and cut through the tail cleanly, with her Chikudo that was covered in Raiton chakra. Rashi's momentary lapse of concentration costed him greatly. Kakashi and his clone ran the stream of electricity straight through Rashi, hoping to slice him in half. But, both Mikasa and Kakashi suddenly jumped away when there was an explosion of chakra from the Four Tails Jinchuriki. Kakashi had to avert his eyes when he saw Sai fly past him, courtesy of Han, who had punched the younger kid with great strength, right in his abdomen. Flipping in mid-air, Sai firmly landed on the ground with heavy breaths. He decided to avoid getting in close quarters with the Five Tails Jinchuriki. He learned it the hard way that the steam release could augment Han's strength by multiple times. Both Kakashi and Mikasa once again jumped back and regrouped with Sai, as now both the Iwagakure Jinchuriki stood before them covered in their Bija chakra. They had to quickly dodge again as both the Jinchuriki's tails extended and chased after them. Kakashi used his Raikiri to stab one of the tails, while Mikasa and Sai stabbed the tails chasing them with their Chikudo, thereby stopping their movements. However, it was only momentary as the strength of the Bija chakra broke the swords and hit both Mikasa and Sai, making them hit the ground roughly. They groaned in pain as the corrosive Biju touched their skin, burning it to some extent. Seeing the two of them, Kakashi appeared before them quickly and with swift feet tore through all the chakra tails with his Raikiri. However, Mikasa could see that even Kakashi was running on fumes now. Having utilized the Sharingan for so long was taking a toll on Kakashi's body and his chakra reserves. Usagi-senpai, we are not going to last much longer, if this keeps up. I'm almost out of chakra and I won't be able to fight for much longer. Sai said honestly as he panted. He cursed himself for not delving into ninjutsu more. En route, Danzo had made the higher-ranked shinobi train him only in kenjutsu, ink-based ninjutsu, and taijutsu. While he was an adequately good shinobi, fighting a Jinchuriki who had complete control over his Biju was not something he had imagined in his life. Sai, while we keep these two busy, go look for Shibuki, Senji and Fu. You know their general description, right? We can't afford to stay here much longer. Take them away from here if they are still alive or else seal their bodies in a stasis scroll. We'll retreat after that. Understood. Kakashi ordered seriously. Everyone's attention immediately turned to the other fight when they felt the entire area shook. Turning to their right, they noticed that both the Kages were momentarily immobilized with Naruto implanting them with his black chakra rods. However, it was Mikasa who had noticed Orochimaru eyeing the fallen Uchiha and make a run for him with his katana drawn. Without giving it any further thought, she paced herself as fast as she could and moved towards Itachi. As Orochimaru was now at arm's length behind Itachi, he thrusted his kusangai forward and stopped in his tracks when his sword pierced the straight through the chest. However, he frowned on noticing it was Mikasa whose chest he had pierced, instead of Itachi. Amaterasu, Naruto said, as the black flames caught onto Orochimaru's arm holding the katana, which forced him to jump back in pain. Running towards Mikasa and Itachi, Naruto caught the kunoichi in his arms before she hit the ground. Mikasa! Mikasa! Hey! Don't close your eyes. I'm here! Cried Naruto as he quickly removed the sword from her chest. A look of horror formed on his face on seeing that the sword had pierced right through her heart. More tears slipped from his eyes, as he felt her body go limp. Glancing towards Itachi for a second, Naruto noticed that he had already fallen unconscious, but he was still alive. Focusing his attention back on Mikasa, he placed her body on the ground, and put both his hands on her wound and attempted to heal her. 2 minutes passed, but he could not sense her life force getting any better. It's fine Naruto. I'm just glad that Itachi is safe. Mikasa gently whispered as Naruto saw a serene and calm look appear on her face. Hey, don't speak. Save your strength. I'm going to save you, okay? Replied Naruto in between sobs. More worry laced onto him, as he couldn't feel any pulse from her. As a few more seconds passed, he closed his eyes shut as he now knew, she was dead. That bitch. Why couldn't you stay put in your damn place? Orochimaru yelled in frustration as he shed his skin. But, before his eyes could even follow or react, he felt his body get pierced by several black rods as he fell onto the ground. Looking front, he saw Naruto's left arm was pointed straight at him. Naruto slowly stood up from his spot with his eyes still shut. All he could feel around himself was hatred and death. Even to this day, he could not understand why shinobis fought, why they killed each other needlessly, why couldn't they just accept the differences the different nations had so that there would no more needless wars and death. His chakra spiked to dangerous levels, as a strong gust of wind started circling him. Even Kurama was tensed when he felt Naruto's emotions and line of thoughts. Large amounts of rubbles were pushed back by the force of his chakra as he felt the hatred inside of him grow deeper and the desire within him to kill grow stronger. Kakashi and Sai wanted to go towards their teammate, but the force of Naruto's chakra was so strong that they could barely move an inch. For the first time in years, Orochimaru felt the sensation of fear. He wanted to run, but these damn rods prevented him from any movement. His eyes again shifted towards the Namikaze, and it was this point that he had a clear view of the Rinnegan. Those accursed eyes. Even Han and Rashi found it difficult to move, and moreover, their own bijou were yelling in their mind to run away from here as quickly possible. He saw the blonde place his palms together and mold considerably large amount of chakra. Chibaku Tensei, Naruto muttered hypnotically under his breath and formed a black sphere in his hands, the size of ball. The black sphere levitated in the air and flew high up before it came to a stop. The ground beneath everyone suddenly began shaking violently, as it began tearing up and rose into the air to stick around the black sphere. Han, Rashi and Orochimaru began panicking greatly when they felt themselves also getting pulled along with the large pieces of rocks. Kakashi and Sai couldn't believe that it was Naruto who was doing this. They both knew that the young Namikaze was ridiculously strong, but what they were seeing was simply unreal. I need to get out of here. That thing looks bad. Orochimaru thought with sweat dripping from his face. Seeing that he could at least move his hand, he drew some blood from his hand and placed it on the ground. He immediately disappeared from the area, leaving no trace of himself ever being in Takigakure no Sato. Naruto realized that Orochimaru probably used reverse summoning jutsu to get himself out of this situation, but he did not care about. His time would come. There's no further need to resist. Naruto stated with no emotion in his voice. Kakashi and Sai breathed a sigh of relief when they realized that they weren't being pulled towards that black sphere. Both jumped back, away from the area to catch their breath. They were pretty much out of chakra, and fighting the two Jinchuriki had taken a lot out of their stamina. However, Kakashi had become highly concerned about Naruto upon hearing him speak. More bijou chakra began covering Han and Rashi as they tried to free themselves from the intense gravitational pull, but none of it gave any results. Soon enough, the two were stuck under the pieces of rocks that broke from the ground and stuck to the black sphere. Naruto simply looked on as he saw the two Jinchuriki thrash around wildly. He did not feel content on defeating the enemy, he did not feel sad on seeing his friend die, he just did not feel anything at all right now. A few seconds later, the jutsu seemed to be complete, as now there was a large spherical rock, something akin to a meteor, levitating in the air with both the Iwagakure Jinchuriki trapped inside. Looking to his right, he saw that the Nidaime Hokage and Sandaime Reikage were still rooted to their place. He was about to move towards them when he saw the two of them disappear in a cloud of smoke. He must have summoned them back too. Naruto thought vacantly. He turned around with a blank look on his face, as he heard Kakashi and Sai walk towards him. From the looks of it, both appeared to be extremely battered and beaten up. Naruto. Kakashi called out to him with his head hung low. Yet again, he lost someone in his team, and yet again he felt that emptiness inside of him. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.